You can type in the chat box and I can see what you type, and I can also ask questions that you can respond to. And because I don't want to miss anything that you say or any of your questions, what I like to do is stop halfway during the presentation or stop after a major concept is presented to check to make sure you understand, and then to stop at the end for questions. And that gives me a chance to really pay attention to you. So we'll try to follow that today. That's been working out pretty well so far. The presentation will be recorded for you, and the PowerPoint slides will be emailed to you and are available on the shared files. And I believe this is done after the presentation. Um, and the other thing I wanted to say is that, we're talking about conflict resolution. We're giving examples of different conflicts. And sometimes, when we're sharing some examples or when other people share examples, we could feel triggered, emotionally triggered, and feel overwhelmed and flooded with feelings. And that is okay. I totally get that. And I understand if you need to take a break away from the screen to take some deep breaths, if you need to go to your safe space or call your safe people, um, please do so. Please take really good care of yourself. And please feel permission to do that. So, to begin, of course, we are going to try to come up with a definition of conflict. And even though there's a million of them, these are a few that really stood out to me. And we'll see which ones you guys like. Um, Conflict is two or more parties when two or more parties must choose between self interest and collective interest. A conflict is a process in which one party perceives that its interests are being opposed or negatively affected by another party. For there to be a conflict, a party must perceive the opposition or resistance of another. And I mean, when we think of a conflict, we think of a disagreement or an argument that's kind of gone on for a while. But I'm just wondering, is there any other way that you would like to define conflict for yourself? And just take a moment to see. Okay, yeah, in turn. Okay, I see people are giving examples. So let's move on to the example slide. Okay, so I see some people have given examples of work conflict, internal conflict. Someone gave the definition difficulty seen eye to eye. That really corresponds well with what we're going to be talking about today: misunderstandings, husband conflicts, and in layman's way, drama, right? Here's a list of examples. This does not cover all of the examples at all. This is a small list of examples. Excuse me. And I'm sure that you can come up with so many more. Couples conflicts, we have parent, child, and teen conflicts. Excuse me, sibling conflicts, friendship conflicts, political conflicts, religious conflicts, employee boss conflicts, coworker conflicts. Triangles is a family therapy term when two people are in a conflict and they call in a third person to try to help resolve the conflict. And then that third person takes sides. That's a triangle. And neighbor conflicts. Let's see, perceived affairs versus real ones. Couples, yep, couples conflicts. Co-parenting conflicts, yes. Someone shared one at the last webinar that was huge that I can't believe I left off of my presentation. But the conflict around vaccinations right now, people that are pro vaccinations and people that are anti vaccinations, that's a huge conflict right now that's happening in the world. So thank you all for your examples. Any other examples that you want to share before we move on? Group decisions. Oh yeah. So when the conflict involves, more than two or three people, but it involves a whole group. And boy, are those tough to navigate. And so what I'm hoping that you will get out of this group webinar, my hope for you is that by the end of the group webinar, you will know how to use an encounter um, to resolve a conflict And when I say resolve, I don't mean that one person wins over the other person. I know a lot of times we think of, oh, a conflict resolution is when one person gets their way and the other person, or they compromise. The way I'm defining conflict resolution is when both people can have a voice and feel understood, that their positions are understood. And then they work something out based on that understanding between each other. They work out a resolution amongst themselves. And so that is the way it is being defined for this purposes of this presentation. Looking at another example, mental health related conflict. Yes. Another example, conflict among family. Example, my dad always asking me if my brother ate. I care, but daily it gets draining. Our brother has depression and does not eat at times. Been for years. Yes. Great example. That's a tough one. Thank you for sharing. It sounds very draining. And so we're going to learn, some strategies also of how to communicate, with others, and do that effectively as well. And that is one of the really best ways to resolve a conflict is through communication, calm communication. So the theory of Moreno says that conflict is when two people are unable to understand the other person's point of view, or they're unable to role reverse with one another. And I think someone just mentioned that conflict is when we don't see eye to eye. Well, a role reversal is a stage of development whereby we are able to understand the other by examining their point of view. And usually we get stuck when we get stuck on our own point of view and we're not able to see the other person or understand the other person's point of view. And we're locked in our point of view and we just want what we want. Um, and so using that same language of eye to eye in a role reversal, I look at you with your eyes and you look at me with mine. And so we shed our identity and we become the identity of the other person and vice versa. And so I'm going to hold off on that answering that question because I'm going to explain more about role reversal. And then, so according to Hale, a role reversal is an exchange of roles, an exchange of positions. So conceptually, a role reversal means transcendence of the self, putting yourself in another's place, remaining as we are, and mentally trying to figure out what it must be like to be that other person. Okay. And these are the steps to role reversing with someone. And this really, I think, is best to be role played or kind of visualized in your mind. Obviously, calm down, whatever your strategies are for calming down, whether you use an app, nowadays they have phone apps, there's Headspace, there's Calm, all these other, apps to help us to calm down. They're taking deep breaths, going for a swim, going for a walk, um, just kind of letting time pass for a day and taking 24 hours to just kind of sit on your feelings and thoughts without acting on them, but just really trying to calm that vagus nerve down so that your entire nervous system calms down. And then you change physical spaces with the other person. So in your mind, like you would switch physical spaces with the other person. So you would move into their space, they would move into your space. And so in a role play, it would be literally, you switch places like this. That's going back to yourself. That's a role reversal. When you switch places, that's going back to yourself. That's a role reversal when you switch places. And so you approximate the person physically and repeat the verbal dialogue of the other person. Deepen the experience of the other person internally by doubling the person's feelings. And by doubling, we mean by verbalizing what you are in touch with are the other person's unspoken feelings. Risk in the role of the other. Put in your own insight. Tell yourself what that person might tell you, and then reverse back into your own role. And this is how we role reverse with someone. I'm going to take a moment because I just shared something pretty major. I just said that usually we're stuck in a conflict because we're stuck on our point of view and we're not able to see the other person's or experience the other person's point of view. That in a role reversal, we allow ourselves to viscerally switch places with that person and put ourselves in their place. Does anyone have any questions about that? And I do want to say, um, before I move on, I have contraindications here that I'm going to share right now because I see someone's comment on here. And that is that we do not have to reverse roles with an abuser if it is contraindicated as part of our therapy. That is, contraindicated with this model. So I just want to make sure that you can follow your own therapy process and not have to reverse roles with someone who has been abusive with you. We're talking about, you know, everyday conflicts with people who are on the same power differential as you are when we talk about conflict resolution. So I just wanted to make sure that that I explained that and mentioned that. So. And thank you. Thank you for reminding me to share that. Someone's put on their abusive family. Listening to respond versus listening to comprehend. Hmm. Yes, I like that because there is very little listening in a conflict. There's a lot of talking, but and a lot of responding, but there's not a lot of listening. So that's a good one. What is the other person isn't articulating their point of view, just their desired outcome. Sometimes we get stuck on the outcome and we have a hard time going through the actual process of conflict resolution. So if they're stuck on the outcome and they're not able to role reverse, it's going to make an encounter really hard. We haven't even gotten to talking about what the stages for an encounter are. So good question. What if you understand their point of view, but they refuse to believe it? Excuse me. So if you understand their point of view better than they do, but they're sort of in denial, um, that's going to make it kind of hard for the conflict to be resolved if they don't even understand their own point of view. Their point of view needs to be clear to them, and they need to be able to, articulate it some way, verbally or non-verbally. And when I say non-verbally, I mean, sometimes people do this through letter writing, um, and or through artwork. I know we have a lot of people who have trouble with social communication, and sometimes artwork really helps. Is the ability to have empathy or not a part of understanding others? The ability to have empathy is, I think, what you're asking, is that important? Um, is it a part of understanding? Absolutely. I know Brene Brown has a great short video on YouTube on empathy, and she defines empathy as being able to feel what other people feel. Here, I'm talking about doubling, which is more than empathy. I'm saying that to be able to encounter someone, not only do we need to be able to feel what they feel, but we need to be able to feel their unspoken feelings. And so we're so connected to them empathically that we're able to double things that they're not even saying. And it's sort of like, I'm going to give you some examples of that when we get to that slide. Um, I never go to bed upset. I don't know if I could do 24 hours. You never allow yourself to go to bed upset. That's great. That's really great if you can do that. And sometimes it's not that you're able to resolve the conflict, but you're just able to calm yourself down somehow and put it on pause so that you can take care of yourself and give your body some rest. What if the conflict is in progress and there is not a way to remove yourself to calm down? There's not a way to remove yourself to calm down. Um, hmm. Why wouldn't there be a way to remove yourself? Would you not be able to say, I'm going to need to take some space, to calm myself down so that I can have a successful conversation about this? Is it because of power issues, power dynamics, or control issues that you're not able to remove yourself? Um, Love this. What is this? Does this rely on the other party being open to role reversal also? Absolutely, it does. And both parties really need to be willing to be open and flexible and be willing to, have a voice, but also hear the other party's voice as well. And that takes a lot of calmness and empathy. What if the other person does not cooperate? If the other person does not cooperate, an encounter cannot happen. Um, they Both people need to want the encounter to happen. So I have a question for role reversal. Okay. So when I understand how the other person is feeling, I then start to feel shame and feel absolutely terrible for even fighting or arguing. Okay. I no longer take my feeling into consideration. Sometimes I even feel bad for days. How do you overcome this feeling? And why do some people have a hard time feeling better even after the fight or conflict is already settled? Okay. So, two-part question there. So, it sounds like sometimes we can over empathize with the other person and completely forget about our voice and our needs and abandon our emotional needs and just sort of adopt what the other person needs and forget about ourselves. And so we really want to make sure there's a boundary that we set in our minds between what we need and what they need, and to make sure that we don't lose what we need, and lose our voice on what we need. And then why do some people have a hard time feeling better even after the fight or conflict is already settled? Because I think sometimes resolving a conflict, involves perhaps giving something of ourselves that feels uncomfortable to give, or compromising in some way. And maybe it means not getting exactly what we want. And that does feel uncomfortable. Sometimes doing the right thing feels uncomfortable. So let's see. I love the role reversal idea and would like to try it with my partner. Good. We both get stuck wanting to feel understood. So this seems very useful. Question. In the moment of conflict, how to remember to calm down and start the steps? Yes. You have to just really be good at picking up on what are the cues that your body's giving you that you're getting upset. What starts to happen. Um, so for me, like I start to feel hot, my heart starts racing, um, my becomes tight, my muscles become really tight, and I realize that my voice becomes elevated, and I realize, whoa, wait a second, I think I'm upset. I'm picking up on all the cues that my body is giving me that I'm upset, and I think this would be better resolved if I was calm. So I'm gonna, take some space. I'm not leaving the conflict. I just am taking some space to calm myself down because I want to be able to have an effective conflict resolution with you. Please say more about telling yourself what the other person would tell you. Okay, so let's go into that. Great question, great transition question, because we're going to talk about doubling. And so I will come back to that question because I actually wanted to tell you that role reversal, according to Moranian theory, is the third stage of personality development. Okay. And just so you know, doubling is the first stage, mirroring is the second stage, role reversal is the third stage, and countering is the fourth highest stage of personality development. And I'm going to explain to you all the different stages, but I'm going to jump to encounter for just one moment, because it involves role reversal. So, in an encounter, there's a deep reciprocal meeting wherein we could not only understand each other's perspectives, but wherein we could viscerally experience what it is like to be the other person. And I just love this picture, to capture that, what an encounter is. We can viscerally experience what it's like to be the other person, and we can come back to ourselves after that. And And so you have to be able to role reverse to do an encounter. And so there are pre-existing skills required to do a role reversal. The Remember the two earlier stages of personality development that I mentioned, doubling and mirroring? Well, according to Moreno, we are able to role reverse with others when we have been adequately doubled, mirrored, and have a strong sense of who we are and a strong sense of ourselves. So let's talk about what I meant by that. That was such a great question. What I meant by telling yourself what the other person would tell you. Let me say more about that. So, an encounter requires us to stay connected to ourselves while we transcend ourselves and take the role of another human being, knowing that we can then return to ourselves. And again, it's the highest level of personality development. There are blockages to encounters when we're not able to role reverse. And I think I'll be answering the question once I explain doubling and mirroring and the blockages to role reversing. And I'll stop after each concept to make sure that you can ask your questions. So, the blockage to being able to role reverse, if we have not had our own narcissistic needs met, then we are unable to role reverse with others, and an encounter cannot happen. I know every time I show this slide, and I get questions about the term narcissistic, and people ask, but isn't narcissistic a bad thing? And it can become a disorder. And I noticed that there's a group on narcissistic personality disorder because when we're babies, we're supposed to be the center of the world in our family. The world is supposed to revolve around us. Our feeding schedule, our changing schedule, our holding schedule, um, kind of takes over and dominates, and it's supposed to be that way when we're babies, um, because that's what healthy development for a baby is, because a baby can't do that for itself. So so this in this term in this on this slide, the term narcissistic is being used in a healthy way to talk about having our needs met as babies, and that we have to have those needs met. And let's talk about what those needs are, which brings me to doubling and mirroring. So, how do we get our narcissistic needs met? So, we have to have been doubled, we have to have been mirrored, doubled and mirrored. And I'm going to explain what each of these means and then pause after each one to see if there's any further clarification or examples that I need to give. Doubling, according to Moreno, when we are doubled, we are able to have our unspoken feelings understood and verbalized by another person. For example, when a child comes home from school and throws their book bag on the ground and sulks, and a parent says, if I'm you, I feel frustrated, and the child agrees. And so that is what doubling is. It's the first stage of personality development because as babies, excuse me, our parents are able to understand our unspoken feelings. And I'll say this, instead of using the word parents, I'll say healthy caregivers, because not everyone has had healthy caregivers for parents. I don't know anyone who has had healthy caregivers. But in a healthy family, a healthy caregiver is able to not miss a beat and know when the baby cries, oh, that crying, the baby's hungry and needs to be fed. The baby's diaper needs to be changed. I know that cry. Or I know that cry, the baby just needs to be held right now. And so that's what doubling is. It begins when we're infants and continues. And unless we have that need met, we're not able to role reverse because we ourselves need to be doubled. And that helps us then to be able to tolerate mirroring. And when we're mirrored, but before I go on to mirrored, does anyone have any questions about doubling? This is what I mean when I say, that we get to tell ourselves what the other person would tell us because we get to double the other person in the role reversal. We get to experience what they feel so viscerally that we can tell ourselves what they would say. Just like the healthy caregiver can read what the infant needs and give the infant what it needs. So let's see. Here's a comment. There are times when clients come in and are frustrated, upset, most often displace their anger, blame me, project. My therapist suggested for me to sort of match their energy and say, "Oh, that must be so frustrating," and restate what they say. Perfect. That's what doubling is. Great example. I'm so happy that you shared that example. I find that difficult without letting go my perception of them. Okay, that's okay. Thank you for sharing that. It is difficult, to let go of your perception. You have to let go of judgment. You have to really be viscerally in their place and allow yourself to let go of your own perceptions and your own views. That's really hard to do, and I can see why the encounter stage is the highest. According to Moreno, the highest level of personality development. I had an ex friend of over 12 years who constantly invalidated my feelings and never understood why the things she did made me upset. She always had to defend herself. I realized over time that I needed to end that friendship, and I feel more at peace with that. That's good. Thank you for sharing. This might be getting ahead of the presentation, but what about when the other person is unable to also do these things you mentioned? Then an encounter cannot happen. um, and whatever stage they're stuck at, that's what they should focus on. If they're stuck on the doubling, they haven't had enough doubling, then they could engage a therapist to do receive the doubling that they didn't receive. And that's the good news is, let me just I really want to call up a rainbow right now, because the good news is it is never too late to receive good enough doubling. We can receive good enough doubling at any time in our lives. And that's what I love about this theory, is that it's really hopeful. Sometimes removing yourself is just stopping the combo until later, right? In a car, you can't leave. Eh, Why can't you leave in a car? Do you mean because the car is driving, or is the car stopped, or can you stop the car and get out of the car? I'm not sure what you mean by that. People are just connecting to each other, which is great. How to address situation if clients, customers are angry. I get really nervous. Most of the time, they are angry with protocol or the way things are organized. So the first thing you do is you start with a doubling. Start with doubling, and the other person who commented about how they repeat exactly what the client says is doubling, because doubling really starts out as just repeating what that person is is saying, and then being able to add on, because you're so connected to what they're feeling, you're able to add on what's unspoken there. um, I definitely struggle to wait to calm down because I want so badly to get my point across, or for the person to not misunderstand me, and that's okay. We all want to be understood, and we all kind of want that, and need that desperately, because we're human. And so, not so much how to get over that, but maybe learning some strategies to help you, that when you're in that stage, that you're open to getting having your point heard, but also being willing to hear somebody else's point of view and do a role reversal. I'm so happy that there's a lot of connecting going on in the chat. I hate not getting what I want. Yeah, we all do. We all hate that. Too much happening in this chat. I'm having a hard time focusing. Just want to listen to the presentation. Okay, so let's move on. Let me just see if there are any other questions on doubling. Okay, there are some questions on doubling. What if the person is hard to double? Some people are very hard to double, and and that says a lot about that person's personality development, and it says a lot about your relationship with that person, and it says a lot about perhaps the trust that's been built between you and that person. I think the person who is willing to be doubled has reached, has had that personality development need met as a child. They've been doubled, and they're open to doubling, and they're trusting you to double them. So there has to be a level of trust that's been built in the relationship, to and so for some people, they have a hard time being doubled because maybe there is a personality disorder and they've just never been doubled before. And this is something that they have to have done and have mastered for themselves. And, okay, good question. Interpreting a person's needs based off their verbal and nonverbal signals. What happens is you first take on that person's, just their physical stance. And once you get into their physical stance, you begin to connect to what they're feeling. And once you hear what they're saying and repeat what they're saying, you begin to really connect to what they're feeling if you allow yourself, to really deeply double someone. And then it's a combination of both verbal and nonverbal signals that allows you to then double what that person needs, kind of like in the example with the child and the mother. So if you weren't doubled through childhood, how do you accomplish this or subsidies um, this in adulthood? Subsidize this in adulthood. There's a lot of ways you can be doubled by a really good friend, by a really good partner, by a family member, by a therapist, by a coach, and it's just someone who's really, really willing to listen and to connect to what's really going on internally within you, with your feelings and your thoughts, and they're able to sort of merge with that and help you to give a voice to it. And you can feel the doubling, you can feel the validation when it happens. And so I just wanted to make sure that you know that. So great question, and this is a good transition question to the next slide on the presentation, and I do want to move on to the next slide. What if they take it that way? If it was phrases, "You look angry." If you say to someone, "You look angry," you're not doubling them; you're mirroring them. And that could make them even more upset because doubling helps us to feel validated because you're merging with what I feel. And so to be able to say, yeah, I know the protocols here can be really confusing sometimes for me too. That's a double. You merge with what they're feeling. But if you say, you look angry, you're mirroring kind of what they might be feeling, and you haven't taken the time to double them yet, and they can become defensive. So mirroring, according to Moreno, mirroring is the second stage of personality development, right before role reversal. And we are mirrored accurately when someone recognizes and reflects back to us our true self. For example, when you feel exhausted after a long day at work and you arrive home and your partner says, "You look exhausted. How was your day?" That is mirroring because instead of merging with what you're feeling and doubling your unspoken feelings, they're looking at you from an objective mirroring stance, right? And reflecting back to you what they see. And like I said, doubling is the personality developmental stage that needs to occur before we can be mirrored without feeling defensive. I know when somebody mirrors me without having taken the time to double me, that it makes me feel defensive. And this is just because that stage of personality development, doubling, has to happen first before we can mirror someone. And both these stages, doubling and mirroring, have to happen before we can role reverse, do the steps to role reversal. And the role reversal has to be able to happen before we can do an encounter. But before we move on to that, are there any questions about mirroring? Does this need have to be met specifically by each person in potential conflicts? Um, does it have to be met? And I mean, I think if they really want to be understood, if both parties really want to be understood, and that's what the goal is for resolving the conflict, then yes, I think that the doubling and the mirroring and the role reversal needs to happen in order for this conflict to be resolved, according to this model. A slide that shows the Moreno development in order, I can definitely create that. Um, they're sort of presented in order on the presentation, but that's a good idea. I can make a slide for that. Is it possible to prevent any anxiety while with others because it can lead to more communication that the other person may be expecting? I'm essentially asking how to prevent emotions from coming up and pressuring moments. I think um, that emotions will come up and that it's okay because we're human. But I think that if the emotions are sort of interfering with the ability of the conflict to be resolved, then you can sort of use the strategies we talked about to self regulate and give yourself some space, give yourself a calm, peaceful space, do some breathing and meditating, yoga, whatever you need to do, going for a walk to make sure that you're regulated enough to have, the conflict, the encounter. Um, so someone asked, "What do I mean by doubling?" But that was like 10 minutes ago, and I wonder. We've moved on to mirroring now, so I'm wondering if that person still needs to understand what doubling means. Just to clarify, the other person also needs doubling and mirroring. Okay. How do you increase the volume? Um, for yourself on your computer, or do you mean me? My volume is all the way up. Can you? I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Just doing a sound check. Thank you for commenting on that. Okay. Someone is saying they've never been doubled before, and I totally get that. What that's like. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And someone else is sharing an example of their mom. Um, this sounds like, yeah, someone again who isn't able, who wasn't doubled, um, and so, or mirrored, and so isn't able to role reverse with someone else. And I think you can only control what you do. You can't control what the other person does. And so to just maybe be able to reach out to that person at the right time and offer them, resources and help would be good. I just want to stay focused on doubling and mirroring right now. Okay, so what if you believe the other person is fundamentally wrong? Doesn't doubling weaken your argument by suggesting that we are empathic? So, in this model of conflict resolution, the goal is for each person to feel understood. And there is a right or a wrong, but understanding that person's perspective, is what this is about. And sometimes, so an example of that is the vaccination conflict. That I have clients coming to me and they're in conflicts about the vaccination. Some of them are pro vaccination, some of their family members are against vaccination. They believe that their family members are wrong, but they're not doubling, the anti vax argument. What they're doubling is how that person feels about vaccinations. I hope that helps. Okay. So yeah, we can definitely explain doubling again, for sure. Um, excuse me. Can doubling be done via text, letter, or email? Does it have to be face to face? Yeah, doubling can be done in writing as well. So doubling. I'm going to double the person, excuse me, who said that there was way too much going on in the chat, and that they really wanted to focus on the presentation. So if I'm that person, I feel frustrated that there's chat going on while I'm trying to pay attention to the speaker because it's distracting me. And that would be a double. And I hope that um, I hope that that kind of clarifies what doubling is. So mirroring is not a bad thing. Healthy mirroring is when somebody really reflects to you, like, you know, who you are authentically, and they see your true self. And so, when someone um, someone who's taken the time to double you goes up to you and says, you are just such a good person, and your intentions are so good, and they reflect that back to you, and you realize, I am a good person, my intentions are good, and that sort of helps you feel validated along with the doubling that they've done for you. So mirroring is not a bad thing. What I'm saying is that sometimes we try to mirror someone before we've doubled them, and it makes them feel defensive because we haven't taken the time to double them first. So it's kind of like we haven't taken the time to step into their shoes before we've held up a mirror, to their face. I hope that makes sense. Doesn't have to be face to face. Just went over some differences of doubling and mirroring. Any inherent danger with mirroring during an encounter. The inherent danger of mirroring during an encounter is if you are in a conflict, with someone who might hurt you, and in which case, there are different ways to de-escalate conflicts in those situations that are dangerous. And mirroring would not be one of them because that person would feel defensive. And so sometimes if there could be danger present, what's best is creating, distance, space, and getting the help, that you need. And the priority should be getting to safety. Before doesn't mean right before mirroring. It could just mean any time before you mirror them. I think it is incredible how people can become more attentive in being there for one another through Moreno strategies. Yes. Thank you so much for that comment because it really helps to ground. I feel like if I were to double you right now, if I'm you through these strategies, I feel grounded because people are really able to understand each other and to try to connect to one another. Okay, good. I'm just catching up here with some older comments and questions. I have only had doubling in therapy. I'm glad you've experienced doubling. And that's great that you've been able to experience it in therapy. Thank God for therapy, or thank goodness for therapy. I think you just doubled me, person that never got doubled before. I hope you felt doubled. How did it feel to be doubled when I doubled you? Um, so people are asking more questions about doubling, and I see other people are answering it for them. So thank you for that. Loved your highlighting the goal as understanding versus seeking a right answer. Yes, that's what this model is all about. It's about understanding. It's about being understood, feeling understood, but it's also about allowing yourself to be open to understand and connect and viscerally experience what it's like to be someone else. That's a double double because I focused on the presentation also. So that's great. I love that. Double double. I've never heard of that. That's a great idea. Great concept. Does the other person also have to be doubled? Yes. So let's go ahead and look at those steps to an encounter. I'm going to go over those steps, then I'm going to open up the floor for questions again. So let me just enlarge the screen for a minute here. So the steps to having an encounter are listed here. And so each person in the conflict needs to receive good enough doubling. We've talked about that. That's that very first personality stage of development that gets met in infancy for healthy infants and by healthy caregivers. Each person in the conflict needs to be mirrored accurately. And we talked about what mirroring is and how doing it accurately is really important so that the person doesn't feel defensive, and doubling them, having had chances to double them before they're mirrored, is important because they can feel defensive, when they're mirrored without being doubled. Really listen to the other person's point of view very, very carefully. And even don't be afraid to ask, can you please repeat the last statement? Or can you repeat the last sentence? Or don't be afraid to ask them to repeat, or to say, kind of, I understood you to say this. Is that what you said? Just to make sure that you heard them say what they said before you try to double that other person. And so there is a way that what we do when we are doing, when we are role playing this, is that the double kind of stands sort of next to or behind the person that's being doubled. And the person who's being doubled knows that they're standing there because they want to double them. And that in and of itself creates already um, a climate of validation, because it's not whether or not you do the doubling right or wrong. If you get it wrong, it's okay because the person knows that you're trying to double them. And it helps them to clarify what they feel, and it helps you to understand what they feel. Then the role reversal happens after that, where you switch places and you role play them, and they role play you. So the difference about in the encounter is that there's a double role reversal. So it's you switch places, right? A and B switch places. A becomes B, B becomes A. In a single role reversal, when A and B switch places, A becomes B, but B is still B. I'm talking about a double role reversal where A becomes B and B becomes A. Then you reverse back to yourself. You speak to the other person about the insight you learned being in their role. So once you reverse back to being yourself, once A and B are back to being themselves, they share with each other what it was like to be in each other's shoes. And they say, when I was in your shoes, I could really understand how you felt, about vaccines. And I didn't realize that you were having such a hard time trusting, the government right now. And I really get that now. And even though I'm still going to get vaccinated because I think it's right, I understand why you think it's wrong. And sort of that insight comes from the role reversal. And then through that insight, you're able to find some sort of a solution that's acceptable to both parties based on this insight. So, you know what? I'm going to get vaccinated, but I understand why you're not going to get vaccinated. I would just ask that you wear a mask when you come over or something like that, to stick to the vaccination example. So, does anyone have any questions about how to have an encounter to resolve a conflict? Okay. Other examples of what? Mirroring or doubling? The example I hear you saying you want me to move out is sounds like a mirroring statement. When you say I hear you saying, when you double someone, you start off. The premise is either said or unspoken that you're saying, if I'm you. In other words, if I'm you, I feel this. So a double for that would be, if I'm you, I'm feeling like I need some space and really want me to move out. That would be the double versus the mirror. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So, with the 10 minutes that we have left, I really want to focus on the people who have questions about um, the process of having an encounter now, because we have 9 minutes left and I really want to end on time so that the next presenter can set up their presentation. So, I'm focusing on questions about how to encounter. Yeah, I like what this person said. This will probably only work if both people understand the process of an encounter because they've taken this group R. Yeah, absolutely. I think both people have to understand, the process or have it explained to them, and that can usually be done in some sort of therapy and or reading some of the additional resources that are at the end of the PowerPoint. Okay, so let's see. This was really helpful and help explain why some of the encounters my partner and I haven't aren't are successful. Good. Doubling and mirroring seems likely to aggravate the other party more than help. I'm quite unsure how this encounter method successfully de-escalates a situation and pushes it towards resolution. Um, when you've been doubled by someone that you're in conflict with and you've had them step into your shoes and take the time to do that and have them verbalize that to you, and then you have them mirror you accurately, the feelings of validation that you get from that de-escalates the conflict and wants you and sort of motivates you to do the same for them. And it's done authentically and genuinely. Okay, I already answered that. Is it just sometimes impossible to have a healthy and or successful encounter? For me personally, in my 30s, struggling with still emotionally abusive parents. Yeah, and that's why, when we talk about, someone who is abusive, I did add that, we do not have to reverse roles with someone who is abusive. We do not have to reverse roles with abusive behavior. Um, we do not have to try to empathize with that, or we do not have to try to double it or mirror it. And so, what seems to me to be the goal there would be to get to a safe place first, a safe place emotionally, before you even try to do an encounter. I get how doubling and mirroring can be healthy to achieve, but how does that help with finding actual solutions or compromises? It kind of flows from it. When both people have been doubled and mirrored, that they're then able to come up with a resolution that each of them finds to be acceptable. And it usually just kind of flows from their understanding of each other's points of view. And so, just we only have 5 minutes left. Otherwise, I would give another example, but I want to focus on questions about the encounter. Do you suggest walking through this process with the person with whom we want to resolve conflict? Example, literally saying, I'm learning a method of conflict resolution in therapy. Here's what it looks like. If it's a safe relationship and the other person is open and willing to follow those steps, and there's a level of trust and safety in the relationship, I suggest that, yeah, I'm suggesting that you try this encounter. I'm not suggesting it in a dangerous or abusive situation, though. Hard to have an encounter, impossible to have an encounter with someone who refuses to seek healing or therapy. When they react negatively from the doubling, you repeat what the correction is, and you just say, "Oh, this is what you meant," and repeat that and see if that helps. But just try to repeat exactly what they say, because sometimes I think we start out doubling with our words, and it feels makes us feel defensive, and it's better to just say exactly what the person said. I do this a lot with my clients in therapy, or I repeat back exactly what they say before I double them. And I'm able to write down what they say exactly, so I'm able to repeat it exactly. And once they accept that, then I add my own double statement, deep doubling, which is usually a feeling statement. So if I'm you, I feel really overburdened and really stressed, and that's when the doubling comes in, and that's when they start to feel validated. If the encounter goes downhill, say one party is not doubling, mirroring, or role reversing, what would be the best move? Would it be that you would say, I think we aren't going anywhere with this, or specify if you aren't feeling heard or understood? I think what will be a best move would be to say, is anyone willing to try therapy, so that we can have a professional, show us how to have an encounter and resolve this, since we're all stuck. Because it's okay to ask for help. It is a strength to ask for help. Whoops, where did I? Okay, we have like 3 minutes left. You can't do therapy with every single person you have a conflict with, but you can do your own therapy. If it's somebody that is refusing to do therapy and encounter cannot happen, then you have to make other decisions about the relationship. And so, really thinking about what is in your best interest and what is going to be best for your well-being if that person is not able to encounter. So, um, So I just wanted to, there's a couple minutes left. I just wanted to thank you all for your input and your questions. Um, I have one final question for you, and that is whether or not you're able to have an encounter with someone, do you understand how a conflict can be resolved using the steps to having an encounter? Because that was my hope for you. Yes, you will get a copy of the Groupinar, the recording. You will get a copy of the presentation. What's great is that I have a bibliography at the end of the presentation, and that you can do additional reading on the encounter as well. So thank you everyone so much for just being open to an encounter. And I hope that you have a really lovely day.